I walk into an LGS I haven't been to yet. Look at all these unsuspecting fools. Walking up to a table with 3 players, I ask if I can join in for some casual commander. They say yes without suspecting a thing. I tell them my deck is a 7 out of 10. I mean, everyone's is, right? I bet none of these goons even own any free counter spells or fast mana. I even see some monocolored decks at the table. Don't they know that sub 5 colors is unoptimal? Oh look, a turn 1 win in my opening hand. I'm going first too. I play a fetch land and grab an Underground Sea. Alpha, of course. I'm not a peasant. And then I play a Lotus Petal and a Mox Diamond, pitching another Alpha dual land. With 2 blue mana, I cast Thassa's Oracle and hold priority, casting Demonic Consultation, naming You Are Already Dead, which isn't in my deck. Winning the game on the spot. Timmy begins to cry. Spike starts tearing up their cards in frustration, and Johnny tells the store owner, who calls the cops. Mission complete. Another pub stomped. That is the myth of the Pubstomper. Someone who comes into local shops, lies to poor casual players about their deck's power level so they can use a CDH deck and score easy wins for no prizes or any reason other than the sheer joy of winning. But I think Pubstompers are actually much less common than people think. Now, just like cheaters or other bad actors, there are some who do exist. I run into a few, but they are very few and far between. I think most of the Pubstompers people run into are actually just caused by misconceptions. I've heard many stories from players in person or online about how they met some player who rudely brought out a CDH deck and demolished a pod after lying about their deck's power level. And to clarify, I'm talking about casual commander at your local store or whatever. If there are prizes on the line, then I'm not blaming anyone for bringing out their CDH deck for an actual competition. That's where you use the competitive decks. That would make sense. So let's say your opponent opens with an island and then a Soul Ring into Arcane Signet. It's pretty powerful. Fast mana into more ramp. Then next turn they play a Glenalendra Archmage and start countering spells. That seems really powerful. I mean, fast mana into a very disruptive card. It's not a combo, it's no CDH, but that's a high power deck, right? Well, no. It could just be the Wilds of Eldraine precon. Soul Ring into a 2-mana rock into a 5-drop is an incredibly powerful play that almost every deck can do. Many decks have the ability to pop off if they have the right cards. You could put any deck on a bell curve. The middle is their average draw and what happens most of the time. The bottom end is where you have no lands and a terrible game where you do nothing. Just as your deck can brick and draw nothing, you can also have the opposite happen, where you draw exactly everything you need to win. You got a 3-card combo in your deck and maybe you drew all the cards and had the mana to play them. Even without tutors, you could technically just draw into everything and win on turn 5 or whatever. It happens. I feel like a lot of people might see a deck pop off or do really well one game and just assume that it's a very high power deck. And not that that might be out of the ordinary for what their deck does. Now, of course, people can just say, oh, whoops, I don't always get a Soul Ring opening, blah, blah, blah. That's true. I think another issue is, though, people aren't great at evaluating the power levels. I've had many games where people tell me their deck is extremely powerful, like 8 or 9 out of 10. And then when I try to match that, I realize their deck isn't much stronger than a precon. And in that scenario, I guess I was the Pubstomper. Not because I was trying to, but because there was confusion on what an 8 or 9 out of 10 was. Honestly, these days I've learned to just take whatever they give me and kind of subtract 2. People tend to overrate their decks heavily, which brings me to an issue with the whole X out of 10 ranking system overall. I'm reminded of when NASA ran into an issue, where astronauts were selecting the wrong size undergarments. Since the sizes were small, medium, and large, nobody wanted to pick the small size, even if it was correct to do so. They ended up changing the sizes to extra large, gigantic, and humongous. The 1 to 10 scale is kinda similar. Most people think that a 5 is a precon. So 1 through 4 is worse than a precon. Okay, so who has a deck that's worse than a precon? Most people assume that the deck they built is better than that, which makes it above a 5, but a 6 is an upgraded precon, right? Many players think that their custom deck is significantly better than a precon, so it can't be a 6. Well, then it has to be a 7, because if it's an 8, then that would be too strong. So they're going to let the playgroup know, oh, it's a 7. I feel like the whole precon as a 5 thing is also just outdated. Some of these have pretty powerful cards. I mean, have you seen the Esper Knights deck? That precon is pretty good by itself. If that's a 5 out of 10, then there's nobody who's playing a 1 to 4. Using a 1 through 10 scale is really just a 5 through 7 scale. People are going to say precon, upgraded precon, or 7. And it just doesn't work too well, which is why for me, I prefer low power, mid power, high power CDH. I just ask players which one of those categories their deck falls into. Now with this method, you might run into the issue of everybody saying mid power, and that's kind of the point. This question is actually a trap. It's another reason that Pubstompers don't really exist. Almost all casual decks are kind of generally mid-powered. Unless you have some kind of deck building restriction, like all art must depict a hat, or some weird theme deck like that, then your deck is probably not low-powered. High-power decks is when people generally know their deck is strong. They're running fast mana outside of just Soul Ring, they're probably running some combos, and maybe even some free spells, which a lot of players don't have any of those, or don't have all 3 of those things. They might have 1 free spell, or a combo, or a extra piece of fast mana, but probably not all of those things. And CDH is very, very specific. Competitive commander decks are actually weirdly inbred. They usually run a lot of strange cards that don't really work too well in casual commander at all. And if you're playing CDH, you know you're playing CDH. Or maybe you don't. I've met a lot of people who think they are, but it really is more just high power. So because of that, almost everyone's deck kind of ends up just being mid-powered. Okay, so everyone is playing a mid-power deck secretly. How does that work? How do I make decks that fit at most tables without issues? A few of my decks I've been playing for like a while now, and I confidently say it's mid-power, and even against precons, even against whatever, it feels fair. Everybody seems to have a chance to win. The games go back and forth, bouncing around with who's winning, who's losing. The secret sauce is just removal. That's it. You see, issues come about when someone seems to get a free win. Because if the win was free, their deck had to have been too powerful, right? All my decks are running the minimum 8 to 10 pieces of spot removal and the minimum 3 to 5 board wipes. And I usually have maybe 1 or 2 tutors in there as well. And I always have a way to exile graveyards somewhere in my deck as well. There are way too many players who will just let a Muldrotha player steamroll the table because they didn't pack a Soul Guide Lantern in any of their decks. Between my removal and generally other people at the table, if somebody gets off to a fast start, they just become arch enemy and people target them until they are no longer ahead. And then someone else is ahead. And then people play removal against them if they still have more until the next player is ahead, and so on and so forth. And the game can constantly move back and forth between who's ahead, who's behind, who's playing removal, who's playing threats. And it comes down to flexibility of your removal as well. I've met a lot of players who will complain about a combo at the end of the game. Oh, how could I beat X, Y, and Z? And then when I ask them, do you play any artifact or enchantment removal? And they just say no. Or do you play any graveyard hate? Well, they say no. Okay, so what do you got? Like 2 board wipes and that's it? You called that all of your removal? That's the issue. Right? Cards like Sanguine Bonds and Exquisite Blood seem overpowered if you have no enchantment removal in your deck. But every color can get rid of enchantments, some more easily than others, but you could do it. I honestly think that almost all the Pubstompers in the world are really just one player getting lucky, other players not playing enough answers. If we all just packed a tiny bit more removal and graveyard hate, I honestly think the pub stomping issue would fall to the wayside. Most people are nice players. They're not looking to get some easy wins here and there. Because at a casual commander place with no actual prizes or anything, there's not that many reasons to cheat because you win, and if you win easily without playing much of the game, that's kind of it. Nothing else happens. Again, not saying that there aren't cheaters. I have run into them, but it's not very common. And if you take anything away from the video, it's that CDH players are not ruining your casual pods. I promise you, please don't take it out on us. We just want to play games against other competitive decks, not precons. Anyway, thank you so very much for watching. If you like that, maybe check out one of my other videos. And while you're at it, hit subscribe too, so you can keep up with all my new videos as they come out. And if you disagree with me about Pubstompers, that's totally fine. Let me hear it in the comments below.